Greetings once again, dear travelers, adventurers, and seekers of wisdom. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive into the ancient stories and timeless truths of the ages. Today, we are graced once more by the words of the old sage, Thaddeus, who will guide us through a lesson that is as old as time itself: the power and necessity of kindness. In a world filled with challenges, it's easy to forget that the person beside us may be facing their own struggles. It's easy to get lost in our own battles, but Thaddeus will remind us why it's essential to be kind to others, for we never truly know the weight they carry. But before we embark on this journey into the heart of compassion, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Join our community of truth seekers so you never miss the latest stories, legends, and life lessons that we bring to light. Now, without further ado, let us listen to Thaddeus as he shares stories that remind us all to be kind, for everyone is fighting their own battles. Thaddeus sat, as he always did, in his old carved wooden chair, its weathered arms smooth from the many years he had rested there. His white hair flowed freely over his shoulders, and his eyes, though surrounded by a web of wrinkles, sparkled with the light of wisdom, much like stars breaking through the darkest night. The fire crackled gently beside him, casting flickering shadows across his face as he prepared to speak. The circle of listeners, both young and old, gathered closely around him, waiting in silence for his words to begin weaving their magic. And then, with a soft sigh, Thaddeus began.
My friends, you have come to me seeking stories, and stories I shall share. But before I begin, I want you to take a moment and reflect. Look around you, at the people beside you. Some you may know well, some perhaps not at all. Yet there is something you all share. Each of you is walking your own path, fighting battles that others cannot see. It is easy, far too easy, to pass judgment or forget that those around us are carrying their own burdens, just as we carry ours.
Thaddeus's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of experience.
The world can be harsh, and kindness can sometimes seem scarce, but I have lived long enough to know that kindness is not just an act. It is a choice, and it is a choice we must make again and again, for we never truly know what storms rage within the hearts of others.
Thaddeus leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees as he began the first tale.
Once, many years ago, there was a great king named Alaric. His kingdom was vast, his army strong, and his rule was considered just. But despite his power and the prosperity of his lands, King Alaric was a man burdened by immense grief. You see, he had lost his beloved queen in childbirth, and though many years had passed since her death, the sorrow had never left him. It sat upon his heart like a stone, and no matter how he tried to carry on, he could not rid himself of the pain.
The listeners shifted slightly, drawn into the story, sensing the depth of the king's unseen struggle.
To the outside world,
Thaddeus continued,
Alaric was a king in control, a man who had everything. But inside he was broken. His loneliness and sorrow haunted him day and night. But he never spoke of it. He believed that as a king, he had no right to show such vulnerability, no right to burden others with his pain. And so, he locked it away.
Thaddeus paused, letting his words sink in.
One day, a beggar came to the castle gates. He was an old man, weary from travel, his clothes tattered, and his face etched with lines of hardship. He begged the guards for food and shelter, but they turned him away, saying that the king did not concern himself with such matters. The beggar, in desperation, fell to his knees and cried out for mercy. But no one listened. But fate, as it often does, had a plan. The king happened to be walking the castle walls at that moment and heard the commotion below. Curious, he looked down and saw the beggar. Something about the man's plea, the way he cried out in despair, touched a part of Alaric's heart that he thought had long since turned to stone. He ordered the beggar to be brought to him.
Thaddeus's eyes gleamed in the firelight as he spoke.
The beggar was brought before the king, and when Alaric looked into the man's eyes, he saw something familiar. It was the look of a man who had suffered great loss, who carried unseen burdens. The king asked the beggar about his life, and the old man told him of the hardships he had endured. His family lost to illness, his home taken by raiders, his entire life reduced to wandering, searching for a place to belong. As the beggar spoke, Alaric felt his own sorrow rise to the surface. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to feel the grief he had buried deep inside. The beggar's story, though different from his own, reminded him that pain and suffering were not unique to kings. They were the common thread that bound all people together. Moved by compassion, Alaric did something he had never done before. He invited the beggar to stay in the castle, not as a servant, but as a guest. He shared his own story of loss with the old man, and in that moment, something miraculous happened. Both men, the king and the beggar, found solace in each other's company. They realized that though their battles were different, the weight of their pain was the same. In sharing their burdens, they lightened them, even if just a little.
Thaddeus smiled softly, his voice barely above a whisper.
And from that day forward, King Alaric ruled with a new understanding. He became known not just as a wise and just king, but as a kind one, a king who understood that even the mightiest of men carry invisible scars. He made it his mission to extend kindness to all, no matter their station in life, for he had learned that compassion was the greatest strength of all.
Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames.
Let me tell you another story. This one is an old legend, passed down through many generations. It is the tale of the weeping willow, a tree that stood at the edge of a great forest. This willow was unlike any other tree. It had long, sweeping branches that seemed to bow toward the earth, as though weighed down by an unseen sadness. The villagers who lived nearby often whispered that the tree was cursed, that it wept for the souls lost to time.
Thaddeus's voice grew softer, almost as though he were sharing a secret.
One day, a traveler passed through the village and heard the tales of the weeping willow. He was a curious man, always eager to understand the mysteries of the world, and so he set off to find the tree. When he arrived, he sat beneath its drooping branches, feeling the cool shade it provided. As he rested, he listened, and though it seemed impossible, he began to hear the faintest sound, like the soft sobs of someone in deep sorrow.
The listeners leaned in closer, entranced by the eerie beauty of the tale.
The traveler, filled with compassion, reached out and placed his hand on the tree's trunk. "Why do you weep?" he asked. To his surprise, the tree responded, not in words, but in the rustling of its leaves, in the way its branches swayed gently, as if sharing its pain through the wind. The traveler closed his eyes and listened, truly listened, and as he did, he began to understand.
Thaddeus paused, his gaze far away, as though he could see the very tree he spoke of.
The weeping willow carried the sorrow of all those who had sat beneath it, those who had come to seek refuge from their troubles. The tree had absorbed their pain, their grief, their despair, and over the years, it had become a vessel for their suffering. But instead of crumbling under the weight, the willow had grown strong, strong enough to hold the burdens of others, even as it wept.
The old man smiled faintly.
The traveler, moved by the tree's silent kindness, promised that he would share its story with the world. He wanted others to know that even in the midst of great sorrow, there is strength in kindness. The weeping willow, though burdened with the pain of others, never turned anyone away. It offered shade, comfort, and a quiet place to rest for those in need.
Thaddeus looked around at his audience.
And so, the legend of the weeping willow reminds us that kindness, even in the face of our own pain, is a powerful force. Like the tree, we may carry our own burdens, but we can still offer comfort and understanding to others. And in doing so, we may find that our own sorrows are lessened.
Thaddeus chuckled softly, the sound rich with the wisdom of years.
Now, let me share something from my own life, a lesson I learned long ago, but one that has stayed with me ever since. When I was a young man, I worked as a blacksmith in a small village. I was strong, capable, and proud of my work, but I was also impatient. I had little tolerance for those who moved too slowly or seemed to struggle with tasks that I found easy. One day, an older man came to the forge, asking for help repairing his tools. He was frail, and his hands shook as he handed me a worn-out scythe. I remember feeling irritated, thinking to myself, Why can't he take better care of his tools? Why is he wasting my time? I fixed the scythe quickly and handed it back, hardly looking at the man. But as he left, something in his expression caught my attention. His eyes were filled with a deep sadness, a weariness that I hadn't noticed before. And then, as he walked away, I saw the limp in his step and the way his shoulders drooped under the weight of invisible burdens. Later, I learned that this man had recently lost his wife to illness and that he was struggling to maintain his small farm on his own. He was fighting a battle that I knew nothing about. My heart sank when I realized how unkind I had been, how quick I was to judge without understanding.
Thaddeus shook his head slowly, his voice filled with regret.
That moment changed me. I learned that day that kindness must come first always, for we never truly know what battles others are fighting. Since then, I have tried to live by the simple truth that everyone carries a burden, and a little kindness can lighten that load more than we realize.
The fire crackled softly as Thaddeus finished his tale, and the listeners sat in quiet reflection. The old man's words had touched something deep within them, reminding each of them of the unseen struggles carried by those around them.
My friends,
Thaddeus said gently, kindness costs us nothing, but it is worth more than gold. Remember, every person you meet is fighting their own battle. Some battles are visible, but most are hidden away deep in the heart. So be kind always, for you never know how much that kindness might mean to someone else. And with that, Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing for a moment, as though he, too, was carrying the weight of many stories, many lives. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the wisdom of Thaddeus. If you found value in his words, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories, legends, and life lessons that remind us all to live with kindness, patience, and understanding. Until next time, remember, be kind, for everyone is fighting their own battles.